Imagine you are standing in the middle of Moscow. The year is 1960. It is a city that feels like it is watching you. The buildings are gray. The streets are wide. The people walk quickly and speak quietly. There are eyes everywhere. Not just the eyes of neighbors and colleagues, but the eyes of a state apparatus so vast, so penetrating, so present in every corner of daily life that after a while you stop noticing it. It simply becomes the weather, the air you breathe. You are not an ordinary man in this city. You are a colonel in the GRU, Soviet military intelligence. You have medals on your chest that most men spend entire careers trying to earn. You have sat in rooms where the decisions that shaped the Cold War were made. You have read documents that most people in the world, including most people inside the Soviet Union, do not even know exist. You know things. You know how many nuclear warheads the Soviet Union actually has. You know the real range of the ballistic missiles that Khrushchev boasts about in his speeches. You know the difference between what the Soviet military tells the world it can do and what it can actually do. And those two things, what it claims and what is real, are not the same. Not even close. And here is the problem. Here is the thing that has been keeping you awake at night for months, maybe years. The Americans do not know this. They are making decisions, enormous world-altering decisions about nuclear weapons and military strategy, and how close to push the Soviet Union before pushing becomes catastrophic, based on information that is wrong, based on a Soviet bluff so enormous, so sustained, so carefully maintained that the entire Western world has accepted it as reality. And you are one of the very few people on Earth who knows the truth. So you have made a decision so dangerous that simply thinking it, letting the thought form fully in your mind, is an act that could get you killed. You are going to find a way to tell the Americans what you know, not because anyone asked you, not because you were caught doing something and given a choice, not because of money though. That will come later. Because you believe, and this belief has been hardening in you for years, that the world is closer to nuclear war than anyone in the West understands. And that the only way to pull it back from that edge is to give the other side accurate information. You are going to walk into the CIA and hand them everything. What happens next will shape one of the most dangerous moments in the history of the 20th century. It will put missiles in Cuba, a president in a crisis room, and the world on the edge of nuclear annihilation. And the intelligence that helped pull it back will come in significant part from you. But first, the Americans are going to think you are a trap, and they are going to turn you away. The man behind the uniform. To understand why Oleg Penkovsky did what he did, you have to understand what kind of country produces a man like Oleg Penkovsky. He was born in 1919, not a quiet year. The Russian Civil War was tearing the country apart, the Bolshevik Red Army on one side, the anti-communist White Army on the other. Cities changed hands, families were split. People who had been neighbors for generations were shooting each other in the streets. Penkovsky's father fought for the White Army, the losing side. This was not a small thing to carry. In the Soviet Union that emerged from that war, your family history was not simply your past, it was your file. It followed you. It appeared on forms. It came up in background checks. It could surface at any moment and derail a career, end a promotion, invite scrutiny from people whose attention you absolutely did not want. Penkovsky buried it. He buried it with the kind of discipline and deliberate effort that only someone who fully understands what is at stake can sustain. He became, from the outside, exactly the kind of loyal Soviet officer that the system valued and rewarded. He served in the Second World War. He attended the Frunze Military Academy and later the Military Diplomatic Academy, the institution specifically designed to train Soviet intelligence officers for overseas operations. He rose to the rank of colonel. He joined the GRU, Soviet military intelligence, and built a career that put him in contact with some of the most sensitive military information in the country. He was, by any external measure, a success story. But something was changing inside him, and historians have spent decades arguing about exactly what it was. Some say it was ideological, that Penkovsky, as he rose through the ranks and gained access to more and more of the actual truth about Soviet capabilities and intentions, became genuinely convinced that the system was dangerous, not just to the West, but to the world, including Russia itself. That he saw, from the inside, the gap between Soviet propaganda and Soviet reality, and found it not just dishonest, but terrifying. Some say it was personal. He had been passed over for promotion. His father-in-law, a senior military figure whose connections had helped shield him from questions about his own father's history, was losing influence. Penkovsky's career, which had risen quickly, seemed to have hit a ceiling he could not break through. Men he considered his inferiors were advancing past him. Some say both things were true simultaneously, that ideological disillusionment and personal grievance fed each other, reinforced each other, until the combination became something neither factor could have produced alone. What is agreed upon, what the documentary record makes absolutely clear, is that by the late 1950s, Oleg Penkovsky had made a decision. He was going to find a way to pass what he knew to the West. He was going to become a spy. The approaches. Here is what most people imagine when they think of a Cold War spy making contact with Western intelligence. A dead drop in a Moscow park, a chalk mark on a lamppost, a coded message slipped under a door, years of careful preparation, of identity verification, of establishing bona fides through a network of cutouts and handlers until trust is established slowly, carefully, over months. Penkovsky did none of that. He walked up to Americans, directly, in person, in Moscow. His first attempt came in 1960. Penkovsky identified a group of American tourists visiting Moscow and approached them on the street. He handed them a letter. He asked them, in a combination of Russian and broken English, to deliver it to the American embassy. Think about what that moment looked like. A decorated Soviet military officer in civilian clothes approaching foreign nationals on a Moscow street, handing them an envelope addressed to an American diplomatic mission, in a city where the walls had ears and the street corners had eyes. It was either the most audacious act of espionage in the Cold War, or it was a provocation, a Soviet intelligence operation designed to test Western reactions, identify contacts, see who took the bait. The American tourists did exactly what they should have done. They took the letter to the embassy. The embassy passed it to the CIA. The CIA read it and decided it was almost certainly a provocation. This was not an unreasonable conclusion. By 1960, the CIA's counterintelligence division had been burned, badly repeatedly, by Soviet deception operations. The KGB ran some of the most sophisticated double-agent operations in the history of intelligence. They were extremely good at feeding false information through apparent defectors and walk-ins, using them to identify Western contacts, test CIA procedures, and spread disinformation. The CIA's counterintelligence chief, James Angleton, was a man who had developed, through entirely rational professional experience, a worldview in which almost any approach from a Soviet national could be a trap. Not because he was paranoid in the clinical sense, but because the KGB had demonstrated repeatedly that they were willing and able to run operations of exactly this kind. So the CIA looked at Penkovsky's letter. They looked at who he was, a GRU colonel with access to sensitive intelligence. They noted how he had made contact, brazenly, directly, in a way that no trained intelligence professional would ever do. And they concluded that the most likely explanation was that this was exactly what it looked like. Too good to be true. They did not follow up. Penkovsky tried again. He found other opportunities, other moments, other approaches. He sent additional communications. He put himself in positions where contact was possible, and signaled as clearly as he could without simply walking into the embassy and announcing himself that he was available and willing. None of it worked. For nearly a year, one of the most valuable intelligence assets the West would ever encounter was standing at the door, knocking and being turned away because the people on the other side of the door could not bring themselves to believe that what they were seeing was real. The breakthrough came not through the Americans at all, but through the British. In April 1961, Penkovsky traveled to London as part of a Soviet scientific and technical delegation. GRU officers routinely used commercial and diplomatic cover as legitimate reasons to travel abroad without attracting the scrutiny that would come with overtly intelligence-related travel. In London, through a chain of careful contacts, Penkovsky made his approach to Greville Wynne. Wynne was a British businessman who traveled frequently to the Soviet Union. He was also, when necessary, a contact and courier for British intelligence, MI6, not a professional intelligence officer. What the trade calls an agent, someone who assists intelligence operations without being formally part of the apparatus. MI6 took Penkovsky seriously. They brought in the CIA. A joint operation was established, and after more than a year of being turned away, Oleg Penkovsky finally had someone willing to listen. The meetings that followed were extraordinary. Penkovsky met with CIA and MI6 officers during his stays in London, talking for hours, providing assessments and documents. Back in Moscow, he began photographing classified Soviet military materials using a Minox camera, small enough to conceal in a coat pocket, precise enough to capture the fine print of technical specifications, and passing the film through dead drops and personal contacts. The operation had a code name, Hero. It was about to become the most important intelligence operation of the Cold War. What he handed over. The scale of what Penkovsky passed to Western intelligence over the 18 months of Operation Hero is almost difficult to put into coherent sentences. He photographed and passed approximately 5,000 frames of film. Those frames contained classified Soviet military documents, manuals, technical specifications, assessments, orders of battle that the CIA and MI6 had never seen and in many cases had not known existed. But the numbers do not tell you what mattered. Penkovsky provided the technical specifications of Soviet surface-to-air missiles, directly useful for American pilots who needed to understand what they were flying against. Francis Gary Powers, whose U-2 spy plane had been shot down over the Soviet Union in 1960, had been brought down by exactly the kind of missile whose specifications Penkovsky was now handing to the CIA. He provided detailed assessments of Soviet military capabilities and, critically, Soviet military limitations. The real state of Soviet readiness, the real reliability rates of their missiles, the real gap between what Khrushchev claimed the Soviet military could do and what it could actually do. And this is where Penkovsky's intelligence became something more than useful. It became arguably strategic. Since the late 1950s, the United States had been gripped by what was called the missile gap. The fear was specific and widely shared, that the Soviet Union had developed a commanding lead in ballistic missile technology. Politicians from both parties had campaigned on the issue. John F. Kennedy, running for president in 1960, had made it a central argument that the Eisenhower administration had allowed the Soviets to get ahead. The entire posture of the United States toward the Soviet Union, how hard to push, how much to concede, where the limits were, was being calibrated against an assumption about Soviet nuclear capability that was, as Penkovsky's intelligence now revealed, substantially wrong. The missile gap was a myth. Not entirely. The Soviets did have missiles, and some of them were formidable. But the terrifying advantage that had driven American defense policy for years was, in significant part, the product of Soviet propaganda. Khrushchev had been bluffing, loudly, consistently, and with enormous strategic effect, but bluffing nonetheless. This single piece of intelligence would by itself have justified the entire operation. But the operation was not finished, and what came next would dwarf even that. In October 1962, American U-2 reconnaissance aircraft photographed Soviet missile installations being constructed in Cuba. Soviet ballistic missiles, capable of reaching the continental United States, were being positioned 90 miles from the American coast. President Kennedy was informed on October 16th. The most dangerous 13 days of the Cold War had begun. The immediate question facing Kennedy and his advisors was not simply what to do. It was what exactly they were dealing with. What were these missiles? How quickly could they become operational? Was there a window, days, weeks, before they became active threats? The answer to these questions would determine everything. Whether to strike immediately, whether to blockade, whether to negotiate. And the answer came in large part from the classified Soviet military manuals that Oleg Penkovsky had photographed in Moscow 18 months earlier. The specific missiles visible in the U-2 photographs were the same type covered in detail in Penkovsky's documents. CIA analysts could look at the photographs of the Cuban sites and make precise determinations. The construction timeline, the operational readiness window, the capabilities of the weapons being assembled. This intelligence shaped the decisions made in the White House during those 13 days. It informed Kennedy's choice of a naval blockade rather than an immediate military strike. It gave his advisors the ability to negotiate from a position of genuine knowledge rather than dangerous uncertainty. Penkovsky was in prison by then. He had been arrested as the crisis erupted. But his intelligence was still in the room, still shaping decisions, still, in its way, trying to prevent the war that the man who gathered it had always been most afraid of. The arrest. The KGB did not stumble onto Penkovsky. They found him. The exact sequence of events that led to his exposure remains partially classified and is still debated by historians. Whether those suspicions were triggered by surveillance of Greville Wynne, by anomalies in Penkovsky's own behavior, by information from a source inside Western intelligence, or by some combination of factors is not fully resolved. What is known is what the KGB did once those suspicions formed. They did not arrest him. Instead, they watched. This is important to understand. The instinct when you discover that someone inside your organization is a spy is to arrest them immediately, stop the bleeding, prevent any more secrets from flowing out. But a sophisticated counterintelligence operation takes a different approach. If you arrest the spy the moment you identify him, you get one spy. If you watch him, follow him, map his contacts, trace his communications, you get the spy and everyone he is working with. The KGB was patient. Through the summer and into the autumn of 1962, they built their case. They identified Penkovsky's contacts. They documented his movements. They built an airtight evidentiary record of exactly what he had been doing, with whom, and for how long. And then in late October 1962, as the Cuban Missile Crisis was consuming the world's attention, the KGB arrested Oleg Penkovsky. The exact date remains disputed in the historical record, but the timing was deliberate. Greville Wynne was arrested days later in Budapest, Hungary. He had no warning. Soviet intelligence services had been tracking him across Europe, and when they moved cleanly. Both men were brought to trial in Moscow in May 1963. The trial was public. The Soviets wanted it public, wanted the world to see what happened to traitors and to the Westerners who worked with them. Wynne was convicted and sentenced to 8 years. He served part of that sentence before being exchanged in a spy swap in 1964, traded for a Soviet intelligence officer the British had been holding. He returned to Britain. Penkovsky was convicted of treason and espionage. He was sentenced to death. He was executed on May 16, 1963. He was 44 years old. There is a persistent rumor, one that has circulated in intelligence circles for decades without definitive resolution, that Penkovsky was not shot, as officially stated, but burned alive in a crematorium. the Soviets making an example of him in the most brutal way available. The story appears in some accounts and is denied in others. It has never been confirmed. Whether the rumor is true or simply the dark mythology that grows up around the most sensitive cases cannot be stated with certainty. What can be stated is that the Soviet state made very sure the world knew he was gone. What he left behind. The question of what to make of Oleg Penkovsky is one that serious historians and intelligence professionals have wrestled with for 60 years. He was not a simple man, and his story does not have a simple moral. To the Soviet Union, to the state he had served, to the institution he had betrayed, to the colleagues who had worked alongside him without knowing what he was doing, Penkovsky was a traitor. The word is not a small one in any language. He had violated every oath he had taken. He had given the enemy intelligence that went to the heart of his country's military capabilities. He had done it deliberately, over an extended period, and had worked actively to conceal it. To Western intelligence agencies, he was something closer to a legend. Senior CIA officials, including Director Alan Dulles, described Penkovsky's material as among the most significant intelligence gathered during the entire Cold War, a judgment that has held across 6 decades of historical review. Not the most significant intelligence of a particular year or from a particular region. Of the entire Cold War. One man, 18 months. Robert Kennedy, in his memoir of the crisis, 13 days, wrote that precise intelligence about Soviet missile capabilities was essential to every decision the ExComm made. He could not name his source. The book was published in 1969, and the intelligence that shaped those decisions was still classified. We now know from declassified records that it came substantially from Penkovsky. But perhaps what is most striking about the Penkovsky case, what makes it not just a remarkable intelligence story, but something closer to a moral case study, is what it says about the problem of trust. For more than a year, a man who knew that the world was closer to nuclear catastrophe than the West understood tried to tell the West what he knew. He approached Americans directly. He sent letters. He found intermediaries. He put himself at enormous personal risk repeatedly to make contact with people who could use what he carried. And they turned him away. Not because they were foolish, not because they were careless, but because the system they worked inside, a system built entirely rationally on the lesson that the enemy will try to deceive you, had made them unable to recognize a genuine approach when they saw one. The intelligence Penkovsky eventually delivered may have helped prevent a nuclear war. The missiles in Cuba were not fired. The crisis resolved. The world stepped back from the edge. But consider the alternative, a world in which someone had taken Penkovsky seriously in 1960, in which his first letter had been treated as a possible genuine approach rather than a probable provocation, in which Western intelligence had had 2 additional years of his reporting before the Cuban Missile Crisis. Would the crisis have happened at all? Would Kennedy have had more options? Would Khrushchev, knowing the West understood the true state of Soviet capability, have been less willing to take the risks he took? We cannot know. History is not a laboratory. You cannot run the experiment twice with one variable changed. What we can say is this: a Soviet colonel, carrying the information that could reshape the balance of power between 2 nuclear superpowers, tried for more than a year to give that information away. The people he was trying to give it to were too well trained in suspicion to accept it. Eventually someone listened, and for 18 months that colonel handed over intelligence that changed what the most powerful nation on earth knew about the most dangerous threat it faced. Then they executed him. His name was Oleg Penkovsky. He died 62 years ago in a prison in Moscow at 44 years old. And most of the world has never heard of him. A warning from history. If you have made it this far, if you found this story as remarkable as I do, then there is one thing I want to ask of you. Not money, not even a subscription, though that genuinely helps channels like this survive. Just one thing. Tell one person about Oleg Penkovsky, about the Soviet colonel who spent more than a year trying to hand the West the truth, and was turned away because nobody believed him. About the man whose intelligence sat inside the White House during the most dangerous days of the Cold War. About the spy who may have helped prevent a nuclear war and paid for it with his life. Because that is what history is for. Not simply to remember what happened, but to understand how close the world has come more than once to destroying itself. Next time on Tradecraft, October 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis is at its peak. An American destroyer fleet surrounds a Soviet submarine deep beneath the Caribbean Sea. The crew has lost contact with Moscow. Temperatures inside the submarine are rising. The men on board believe nuclear war may have already begun. And somewhere in the darkness below the ocean, 3 Soviet officers are asked a question that could end human civilization. 2 of them say yes. 1 says no. His name was Vasily Arkhipov, and the world is still here because of him. That story next time on Tradecraft.